You asked me many questions in the community tab, and I answered the first part of them a couple of days ago, and that video actually brought an extra question because many people commented and asked about this poncho that I was wearing in that video. So I'll first explain briefly how this has been made. This poncho is a great easy stash busting project. You can use any yarn as long as they are all about the same weight and any stitches. Mine is mixed crochet and knitting. Every second panel is knitting stockinette. The yarns are all wool. Each strip is 10 centimeters wide, except the front and back middle ones are the width of the neckline. And I crocheted the strips together from the right side using single crochets. And now to the rest of the questions. I like making hexagon cardigans and would like to change it up by trying different stitches, but don't know how to attempt it. I'm showing a Google image search of hexagon cardigans because some might not know what it is. Most of the time they are granny squares or granny stitch. Yes, hexagon cardigans can be done with any kind of a stitch that is easily worked in the round. But of course, if you take a new stitch, it may take some time to calculate right so that the shape is the right when you finish it. So what I would do is draw a pattern, like a dress pattern, of the piece that you will need and mark the center clearly where you start and keep following it to make sure that it's going to be the right size. Would love to know which crochet and yarn related YouTubers you like to follow. I follow all the time what goes on in the crochet and yarn world on YouTube and elsewhere using many different methods. For this question I chose 4 very different channels to show. I'll start with this one, Elise Rose Crochet. She recently changed the name of her channel. Of these ones that I'm going to mention here, hers would be most similar to my own. I mean, in the type of videos that she's doing, a mixture of tutorials and general things about crochet. She has knitting too. I like watching her, I just like the style. Next, this one, Just Vintage Crochet. It's a channel that's different from most crochet channels and it's very interesting. She finds very old crochet patterns. Some of them are 100 years old, some are from the 40s, 50s, and then she makes it. Either so that she already knows what it's going to be like, or that she just has the pattern and doesn't know herself what it's going to be like. Definitely a channel worth watching. Next, this one, Kutova Kika. It means a knitting kika. She's Finnish, and as far as I know, her channel is the largest yarn-related channel in Finland. And also, as far as I know, mine is the second largest. Her channel is more a vlog type, like at the moment she's talking about her pregnancy. And last year she did this here video that's been super popular, over 5 million views by now, where she designed and knitted her own wedding dress and then it shows her wedding on the video. Since then her channel has really grown a lot. So it's a mixture of vlogging and some tutorials as well. This one, Ikoxon, I'm not sure how to say it, is one of the many fairly new crochet channels by young women. It's wonderful to see that so many young women and a few men crochet and want to share it. And I love the style many of them are doing, it's so fresh. This here channel also has both knitting and crochet. Hers and many other similar channels work in such a lovely way of often just starting to crochet, making it up as they go, without worrying too much how it goes as long as the final result looks nice. And also frogging and restarting. Like she made an absolutely wonderful outfit after asking viewers what color and theme they wanted. And when something didn't work out the way it should have, she made something else out of it. I love that creativity. Is there something specifically Finnish in crochet that you could share with us, or about some kind of authentic yarn, or maybe some mosaic patterns? And a similar question from another person. Is there a certain method of crochet that is considered a Finnish design or method, crochet or knitting? I can't think of anything that would be specifically Finnish as far as crochet goes. I know that in the past, like my mother's age, all young women had to crochet a lot of thin lace, thread lace, and put that to sheets and pillowcases and things like that. But I think many of those patterns were passed on from one country to another. There's far more of that in knitting. Knitting has always been more popular in Finland, and there are many popular knitting designs. For instance, each area of the country has their own traditional socks and mittens with the colorwork designs. And many of those could easily be adjusted to mosaic crochet. Maybe they have, I haven't actually followed that. As far as yarns, yes, recently the Finn sheep wool has become very, very popular. And I'm actually just knitting something out of that. It's a natural wool, 100% wool, and it's been treated so little that your hands actually get a little bit greasy and smell of sheep when you knit. It's lovely and soft. It's just like merino, or some people say that it's even softer than merino, the Finn sheep. I'm knitting a sweater at the moment using a Finn sheep wool, and this particular wool comes from the village where I was brought up. They have a company there that concentrates on that. I'm actually knitting finger-in-weight yarn with very large needles, and the reason for that is to have it as light as possible for travel, because this wool is so warm that it doesn't need to be thick. And there's also this place in this here village that's behind me now. What they do is they spin their own yarn from alpacas, and they often mix it with silk and angora that they have got from rabbits also in Finland, and they always check that the angora rabbits are being kept well. So they have alpacas here, and then they spin yarn and also make things with it here to sell. Do you have a special room for your yarn and past makes? In my present home I don't. I moved less than a year ago. In the previous one I sort of had one extra room for that, although I was using it for other things as well, and a guest room. But in my present home, it started going faster. But in my present home I have 2 large walk-in closets, so those are lovely. You just close the doors and nobody sees what's in them, although I mean I do like to know where everything is. But I also like to use wool yarn as part of really house decor. So I have yarn in many places in my living room as well. I have a couple of videos about that, and I'm actually planning to make another one again. For instance, a very high glass vase that's full of yarn. I have put the nicest colors in there. Do you have a dog, cat, or another pet? No, it wouldn't be practical. I'm away from home for 2 to 4 months in a year, so it would be too complicated. But I do love both cats and dogs, and there's one here somewhere at the moment. But quite often I go to stay in one of my daughter's houses because of their cats or dogs. And before this present dog, my daughter had a Chihuahua. He lived for more than 15 years, and he would have been in my place for at least 5 of those years, probably far more, sometimes months in a row. So I'm well used to having animals. Do you have any tips on how to crochet gloves for kids without a pattern? It's a bit hard to answer because it's a very general question. There are so many different ways of making them. My favorite actually for crocheted gloves and mittens is that you do this side and that side separately and then go round them, crocheting them together. I find that the easiest. The question was about gloves, which normally means separate fingers and not mittens. I normally then, if I don't do it in such a way that I do 2 panels, I would start going round, select the stitch I'm using. You would normally have to increase a bit for the thumb gore here, then have the hole. And an important thing for making gloves is that when you start each finger, that you add some chain stitches in between the fingers there. Otherwise it gets just far too tight. That's basically, without having any more information, that's basically what I would say. And in general, anytime you're making things without a pattern, when you're making it up as you go, when it's something that there's 2 different ones, make sure you write it down what you did. Otherwise, you spend so much more time counting all the stitches and rows. And in anything that you make up as you go, it's important to accept that you will most likely have to redo and frog and that sort of things. It's just the same as those who make patterns very often have to try things many, many times before they are finished. So give yourself time and accept that most likely it's not going to work the first time. Then, do you have Krampus there? No,
I had to Google to find out what that was. And then I remembered that it has to do with the Christmas traditions. I remember that when we were living in Belgium, I had heard of that. But at least in Belgium, that had to do with St. Nicholas Day, not Santa Claus, the real St. Nicholas, the 6th of December. But that's all I know about it. What are some things you remember from childhood that are different from today? What is something unique about living in Finland? I was a child in the 60s. So in some ways it would be easier to list what has not changed since. The whole lifestyle, how people are educated, for instance, the kind of work they are doing. When I was in primary school, we were told that agriculture was the main source of livelihood in Finland. It most definitely is not now. And in the 70s, lots of people moved into cities and towns. And that changed the lifestyle. And then, of course, all the changes that there have been worldwide. Internet has changed a lot. Traveling has changed a lot. One memory about traveling, actually. So I grew up in a small village. And when I was at school, this would actually have been at Christmas 68. For the first time, somebody from the village went to Canary Islands for a holiday at Christmas. And after they got back, you know, they had taken these, if you remember, these cine cameras. Some of you remember. They had taken pictures with those. And when they came back, everybody in the village was free to come and see that film at the school. So it was something so unusual, which obviously has changed completely. Unique about living in Finland. Finland, of course, is similar to the other Nordic countries, and there are many similarities in all the European countries. One difference is the language. Our language doesn't resemble any of the Western European or Western languages, except Estonian. Like we just talked there earlier, the fact that every residence has a sauna or access to a sauna is different. But many things to do with the society structure, climate, what it looks like would be shared with the neighboring countries as well.
Do you have some favorite stash busting ideas?
My favorite projects at the moment for stash busting are ones where you use many yarns at the same time. You know, you make a one thick yarn by putting many together, 4, 5, 6, even 7. I just recently made this here scarf like that and a tutorial for that. And I've made many in the past, like this here Afghan that I'm still using all the time. And on the video about the scarf, I'm explaining how I work with the yarns so that the colors change gradually. So that's my favorite at the moment for larger projects. But there's for instance, all the Christmas decorations and other small decorations that I do, and scarves and things like that are great for using up leftover yarn.
Can you please share your experiences of what qualities to pay attention to in a wool yarn so we can avoid making mistakes purchasing wool yarn? Is there such thing as a low quality wool?
This is actually such a big question that it would need a video of its own, basically. And I have actually been thinking of doing that. And the reason for that is that some months ago I mentioned that I don't use acrylic yarn. And lots of people, really many people, wrote in the comments that they would use acrylic for babies, which would be the last thing I would use it for, because they say that wool cannot be washed in the machine. And that belief that wool cannot be washed in the machine seems to be so common that it's worth making a whole video about that, just so that people would start using it more, because there's so many kinds of wools that you can wash in the machine. But to your question, first of all, about if there are bad quality wools, yes, there are. There are wools that are sort of really rough and hurt your hands even when knitting or crocheting. And then there's those kinds that pill. So you have to be using these machines to take those off all the time. There are certain makes, like here in Finland, that I never use because I know that they are rough on my hands and they are scratchy, so I couldn't, for instance, have a hat or scarf out of those ones. Some wools break more easily. The less twisted it is when it's being made up, the more likely it is to break. And especially those ones that are just single strand, you know, they're just like fluff. You know, those are easy to just pull open. Mainly, it takes trying them out and talking to others what their experiences are like.
I'm not a puritanist in using wool. I do use superwash treated wool, so it's 100% wool that can be washed in the machine. And I use a lot of so-called sock wool that has 15 to 25% polyester added to it, or nylon, but I always take polyester. I think nylon is not durable enough in socks. So really the main thing is to check in the band what exactly it is, if it's treated or untreated, because completely untreated wool, of course, gets felted if it gets put into hot water. But as I say, this subject would really take a whole video. While I have been talking, the fire has slowly been going down. So these were all the questions. And thank you everyone who was asking them. I have really enjoyed answering them.